The summer heat pressed down on the quiet suburban street as Officer Marcus Bennett pulled his patrol car behind a silver Honda Civic. His eyes had been trained on the vehicle for the past 3 blocks, watching as it rolled through a stop sign near the community center. At 42 years old, Marcus had spent nearly 20 years on the force, and his instincts told him something was off about this car. The windows were tinted just dark enough to make him suspicious, and the vehicle moved slowly, as if the driver was unsure of where they were going. Marcus grabbed his radio and called in the license plate, his voice steady and professional. The dispatcher confirmed the registration was valid, belonging to a 2019 Honda Civic with no outstanding warrants. Still, Marcus felt that familiar tension in his chest. This neighborhood had seen its share of trouble lately. Break-ins, vandalism, and just last month, a string of car thefts that had residents on edge. The chief had ordered increased patrols, and Marcus took his job seriously. Perhaps too seriously, some might say. As he stepped out of his patrol car, Marcus adjusted his utility belt and approached the Honda with measured steps. The sun glinted off his badge, and sweat already began to form on his brow. Through the driver's side window he could make out a figure, young and still. His hand instinctively moved closer to his service weapon, a habit born from countless traffic stops and the unpredictability that came with each one. He tapped on the window with his knuckles, firm but not aggressive. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a young black woman who looked to be in her early 20s. She wore a simple white t-shirt and had her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles almost white from the pressure. Her eyes, wide and nervous, met his through a pair of glasses that sat slightly crooked on her nose. "License and registration," Marcus said, his tone clipped and official. He didn't smile, didn't offer any pleasantries. This was business. The young woman nodded quickly, her movements jerky with anxiety. "Yes, officer. I'm reaching for my glove compartment now," she said clearly, her voice trembling slightly. She had obviously been taught how to handle police encounters, how to announce every movement to avoid misunderstandings. Marcus watched her carefully as she leaned over to open the glove compartment. His eyes tracked every motion, every shift of her body. When she fumbled with the papers, dropping her registration card on the floor mat, his body tensed. She bent down to retrieve it, disappearing from his direct line of sight for just a moment. That moment was all it took for Marcus's training and his own biases to collide in a perfect storm of terrible judgment. His mind flashed to news reports of officers ambushed during routine stops, of weapons hidden in glove compartments, of split-second decisions that meant the difference between going home at night or not. But beneath those legitimate concerns lurked something darker, something he would never admit even to himself. The assumptions, the stereotypes, the unconscious prejudices that had been reinforced through years of policing predominantly black neighborhoods. When the young woman sat back up, registration card in hand, she found herself staring down the barrel of Marcus's service weapon. The gun was pointed directly at her face, steady in his two-handed grip. His face had transformed from merely stern to something harder, colder. His jaw was set, his eyes narrowed with suspicion and something that looked almost like fear. "Hands on the wheel. Now," Marcus shouted, his voice loud enough to echo off the nearby houses. "Don't move!" The young woman froze completely, her body going rigid with terror. The registration card fell from her fingers onto her lap. Tears immediately sprang to her eyes, and her breathing became rapid and shallow. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, I didn't do anything. I was just getting my papers," I said, "hands on the wheel." Marcus repeated, his gun never wavering. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline flooding his system. In his mind, he was protecting himself, following his training, staying vigilant. He didn't see a terrified young woman. He saw a potential threat, a statistic, a reason to be cautious in a dangerous world. The young woman's hands trembled violently as she placed them back on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. Tears now streamed down her cheeks, and she struggled to control her breathing. "Officer, please," she tried again, her voice cracking. "I'm not armed. I'm a medical student. I was just coming from the hospital." But Marcus wasn't listening. Not really. His focus was singular, his perception narrowed by fear and prejudice. "Step out of the vehicle slowly," he commanded. "Keep your hands where I can see them." By now, the commotion had attracted attention. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. A man walking his dog across the street stopped and pulled out his phone, beginning to record. A woman came out onto her porch, her hand covering her mouth in shock at the scene unfolding on her quiet street. The young woman opened her car door with shaking hands, moving with exaggerated slowness. Every breath she took seemed to rattle in her chest. She had heard the stories, seen the videos, knew how quickly these situations could turn deadly. As she stepped out onto the pavement, her legs nearly gave out beneath her. She steadied herself against the car door, her whole body shaking. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Marcus ordered, his gun still trained on her. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat dripped down his temple, mixing with the tension that hung thick in the air. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel the weight of the gun in his hands, could sense the eyes of the neighbors watching this encounter unfold. The young woman did as she was told, turning to face her car and placing her palms flat against the hot metal of the roof. The heat burned her skin, but she didn't dare move. She pressed her forehead against the car, closing her eyes as tears continued to fall. In her mind, she thought of her mother, of her younger brother, of the patients she had seen just hours ago at the hospital. She wondered if this was how her life would end on a random Tuesday afternoon during a simple drive home. Marcus approached from behind, his training kicking in as he prepared to pat her down for weapons. But as he got closer, something caught his eye. On the passenger seat of the car, visible now through the open driver's door, was a hospital badge clipped to a lanyard. Next to it sat a stack of medical textbooks, their spines clearly labeled with titles about emergency medicine and trauma care. A stethoscope lay coiled on top of the books. His eyes lingered on these items for a moment, and something shifted in his chest. A small voice in the back of his mind whispered that perhaps he had overreacted, that perhaps the situation wasn't what he had assumed. But pride and the momentum of the moment carried him forward. He couldn't back down now, couldn't admit that maybe he had made a mistake. He was the authority here, and he had to see this through. As Marcus holstered his weapon and reached for his handcuffs, the young woman finally spoke again, her voice stronger despite her tears. "My name is Dr. Aisha Freeman," she said clearly, "and I think you should know that my father is watching this entire thing." Marcus paused, his hand on the cuffs. "Your father?" he asked, confusion breaking through his authoritative demeanor. "Yes," Aisha replied, her voice steady now despite her fear. "Look at the dashboard camera mount on my windshield. It's been recording this entire encounter, and my phone automatically alerts my family when I'm pulled over. My father knows exactly where I am right now." A cold feeling of dread began to creep up Marcus's spine, though he wasn't yet sure why. Something about her tone, about the way she said it, made him uneasy in a different way than before. Marcus felt his confidence waver for just a moment as he processed what Aisha had said. The mention of a camera, of her family being alerted, of her father watching should have made him reconsider his actions. But years of authority and the unwillingness to show weakness in front of the growing crowd of onlookers kept him moving forward. He pulled out his handcuffs with more force than necessary, the metal clinking in the heavy summer air. "That doesn't change anything," Marcus said, his voice defensive now. "You still failed to signal properly at that last intersection, and you failed to stop completely at the stop sign on Maple Street. Now stay still while I secure you." Aisha took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She could feel the eyes of the neighbors on her, could hear whispered conversations and the distinct sound of multiple phones recording. The humiliation of being treated like a criminal on a public street washed over her in waves, mixing with her fear and anger. But she also knew she had to stay calm, had to survive this encounter first before anything else mattered. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job," Aisha said, choosing her words carefully, "but I respectfully disagree that I committed any traffic violations. I'm willing to accept a ticket if you believe otherwise, but drawing your weapon on an unarmed person reaching for their registration seems excessive." Marcus's jaw tightened at what he perceived as a challenge to his authority. The fact that she was right only made him angrier. Deep down, beneath the layers of justification and defensiveness, he knew he had overreacted. But admitting that now felt impossible. Instead, he grabbed her wrist, perhaps a bit rougher than necessary, and pulled her arm behind her back to apply the handcuff. "You don't get to tell me how to do my job," Marcus snapped. "I perceived a threat and I responded appropriately. Now you're being detained for questioning, and I suggest you stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," Aisha replied, Her voice strained from the awkward position her arm was being held in. "I'm complying with every order you've given. But this is wrong, and you know it." Before Marcus could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "Officer! Officer, what's going on here?" An elderly white woman was walking toward them, her phone held up, still recording. "This young lady wasn't doing anything wrong. I saw the whole thing. She stopped at that stop sign and you just pulled her over for no reason." Marcus's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. This is police business." "Police business?" The woman's voice rose with indignation. "Police business is pointing a gun at an unarmed girl getting her registration? That's not police work, that's harassment." Other voices joined in. The man with the dog had moved closer, his phone also recording. "This isn't right, man. She didn't do anything to deserve a gun in her face." A younger couple emerged from their house, the wife calling out, "We called the news. They're sending a crew." Marcus felt the situation spiraling out of his control. What should have been a routine traffic stop had become a public spectacle, and he was very much aware that multiple cameras were capturing every moment. His training told him to maintain control of the scene, to project authority and confidence. But another part of him, a quieter voice he had long ignored, whispered that he had made a terrible mistake. He released Aisha's wrist without cuffing her, but kept his hand on his belt, ready to grab the handcuffs again if needed. "Everyone needs to step back and let me do my job," he announced loudly. "This woman was pulled over for traffic violations and I'm conducting a legal stop. Recording is your right, but interference is not." Aisha slowly lowered her arms and turned to face Marcus, her expression a mixture of fear, anger, and something else. Disappointment, perhaps, or pity. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and straightened her glasses, trying to regain some sense of dignity in this humiliating situation. "Officer Bennett," she said, reading his name tag. "I want you to know that I don't hate you. I'm angry, I'm scared, and I feel violated by what just happened. But I don't hate you. I'm a doctor because I believe in helping people, in seeing the humanity in everyone, even in difficult moments." Her words hit Marcus harder than any accusation or insult could have. There was no venom in her voice, no desire for revenge. Just a simple statement of fact from someone who had every right to be furious. It made him feel smaller somehow, more aware of what he had done. "I'm going to need to see that license and registration now," Marcus said, his voice quieter, less aggressive. He was trying to regain some sense of normalcy, to complete the traffic stop and move on, even though they both knew this was far from a normal situation. Aisha nodded and carefully reached into her car, this time making exaggerated movements to show she was simply retrieving documents. She handed them to Marcus along with her hospital identification badge. "This is my ID from Metropolitan General Hospital," she explained. "I just finished a 12-hour shift in the emergency department. I'm a third-year resident specializing in trauma surgery." Marcus took the documents, and as he examined them, the full weight of what he had done began to settle on him. This wasn't some criminal or troublemaker. This was a doctor, someone who saved lives for a living, someone who had probably spent her entire shift helping people, only to be terrorized by him on her drive home. Her driver's license showed an address in a good neighborhood, not far from where they stood. Everything about her checked out perfectly. His radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the tension. "Unit 7, be advised we have multiple calls coming in about your location. Are you in need of backup?" Marcus grabbed his radio, acutely aware of all the phones pointed at him. "Negative, dispatch. Traffic stop is under control. No backup needed." "Copy that, Unit 7. Also be advised that Lieutenant Freeman has requested your status." Marcus froze. The name hit him like a physical blow. Lieutenant Freeman. The lieutenant. His supervisor's supervisor. One of the highest-ranking African-American officers in the entire department, and a legend on the force. A man known for his integrity, his leadership, and his zero tolerance for misconduct. He looked at Aisha with new eyes, really seeing her for the first time. The resemblance was there in the shape of her face, the set of her jaw. How had he not noticed it before? "Freeman," Marcus said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father is Lieutenant James Freeman?" Aisha met his gaze steadily, though fresh tears shimmered in her eyes. "Yes. And before you ask, I didn't bring him up earlier because I wanted to see if you would do the right thing on your own." Because I shouldn't need my father's rank or reputation to be treated with basic human dignity and respect. The color drained from Marcus's face. Lieutenant Freeman was more than just a high-ranking officer. He was a civil rights advocate, a community leader, someone who had spent decades building bridges between the police department and the black community. He was also known for being absolutely merciless when it came to officers who abused their authority or showed bias. Marcus's mind raced through everything that had just happened. The gun drawn on an unarmed woman reaching for her registration, the aggressive commands, the attempt to handcuff her for what amounted to minor traffic violations at best, and all of it recorded from multiple angles by multiple witnesses. His career flashed before his eyes, and he knew with absolute certainty that he had just made the biggest mistake of his professional life. Marcus started, then stopped. What could he possibly say? An apology seemed inadequate, almost insulting given what he had put her through. But saying nothing seemed even worse. Before he could gather his thoughts, another patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. Out stepped Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran officer Marcus had known for years. Rodriguez took one look at the scene, at the gathered crowd, at Aisha's tear-stained face and obvious distress, and his expression hardened. "Bennett, what's going on here?" Rodriguez asked, his tone making it clear he already suspected the answer wasn't good. "I pulled her over for traffic violations," Marcus said. But even to his own ears it sounded weak and defensive. Sergeant Rodriguez walked slowly around the scene, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. He saw the witnesses with their phones still recording. He noticed Aisha's defensive posture, the way she held herself like someone who had just experienced trauma. He observed the sweat on Marcus's face that had nothing to do with the summer heat, and he saw the medical textbooks visible through the open car door. "Traffic violations," Rodriguez repeated flatly. He turned to Aisha, his demeanor immediately softening. "Ma'am, are you all right? Did Officer Bennett harm you in any way?" Aisha shook her head, though her hands still trembled. "No physical harm, Sergeant, but he drew his weapon on me when I was simply reaching for my registration after he asked for it. I announced what I was doing, I moved slowly, and I was completely cooperative. There was no justification for pulling a gun on me." Rodriguez's face darkened with anger. He had served with honor for over 25 years, and had worked hard to be the kind of officer the community could trust. Incidents like this undermined all of that work, destroyed relationships that took years to build, and gave ammunition to those who said the police couldn't be trusted. "Bennett, did you draw your weapon on this woman during a routine traffic stop?" Rodriguez asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus knew lying was pointless. Too many witnesses, too many cameras. "I perceived a threat when she reached into her glove compartment. I was following my training to neutralize potential dangers." "A threat," Rodriguez said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "from a young woman in a Honda Civic in broad daylight, on a residential street, who was complying with your orders to provide her documentation." "That threat? I didn't know what she might have in there," Marcus protested weakly. "She told you she was reaching for her registration," Aisha interjected, her voice stronger now. "I announced every movement." "I did everything I was supposed to do, and you still pointed a gun in my face." Rodriguez held up a hand to Aisha. "Ma'am, I need you to know that this is not acceptable behavior from our department. What happened here today was wrong." He turned back to Marcus. "Give me your body camera footage." Marcus's stomach dropped. He had forgotten about his body camera in the chaos of the moment. Every word, every action, every unjustified escalation would be recorded there. There would be no way to spin this, no way to make it look like anything other than what it was. "Sergeant, I can explain," Marcus began. "Just give me the camera, Bennett," Rodriguez cut him off. "And consider yourself on administrative leave pending investigation. I'm calling this in to internal affairs right now." As Rodriguez walked a few steps away to make the call, Marcus stood there feeling his entire world collapsing around him. 20 years on the force, a decent record despite his blind spots, and it was all about to be destroyed because he couldn't see past his own prejudices for 5 minutes. The elderly woman who had first called out approached Aisha, offering her a bottle of water. "Honey, are you sure you're all right?" That must have been terrifying. Aisha accepted the water gratefully, her hand still shaking as she opened it. "Thank you. I'm okay. Shaken up, but okay." She took a long drink, trying to calm her nerves. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her feeling exhausted and emotionally drained. "I want you to know," The woman continued, "that I've already sent my video to 3 news stations and posted it online. Whatever happens, there's a record of what this officer did to you." Aisha nodded, grateful for the woman's support but also feeling a complicated mix of emotions about the situation becoming public. She had never wanted to be a headline, never wanted to be a symbol or a cause. She just wanted to go home after a long shift at the hospital. Rodriguez returned, his expression grim. "Dr. Freeman, Internal Affairs will need to interview you about this incident. I know this has been traumatic, but would you be willing to come to the station to give a formal statement?" "Of course," Aisha replied. "I want to make sure this is properly documented. Not just for me, but for everyone else who might not have a camera or witnesses or a father in a position of authority. How many other people has Officer Bennett done this to who didn't have those advantages?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Marcus felt its weight. How many times had he been too quick to assume threat? How many traffic stops had he conducted where his biases influenced his judgment? He had never thought of himself as racist. He would have sworn he treated everyone equally. But standing there facing the consequences of his actions, he could no longer deny the truth about himself. Another vehicle arrived. This one an unmarked car that Marcus immediately recognized. His blood turned to ice in his veins. Lieutenant James Freeman stepped out of the driver's seat, and even from a distance, Marcus could see the barely controlled fury in his expression. Lieutenant Freeman was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and a bearing that commanded immediate respect. He had the kind of presence that made people stand straighter, speak more carefully, and think twice about their actions. As he walked toward the scene, every officer present felt the weight of his authority and his disappointment. "Aisha," he said, his voice softening as he approached his daughter. The anger remained, but it was tempered by concern and love. "Baby girl, are you hurt?" Aisha's composure finally cracked as her father wrapped her in his arms. The tears she had been holding back came flooding out, and she sobbed against his chest. All the fear, the humiliation, the anger, and the exhaustion of the past hour came pouring out in those tears. "I'm okay, Dad," she managed between sobs. "I'm not hurt. Just scared." Lieutenant Freeman held his daughter for a long moment, letting her cry, offering the comfort only a parent could provide. But over her shoulder, his eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that made the younger officer want to disappear into the pavement. When Aisha had calmed down somewhat, Lieutenant Freeman gently released her and turned to face Marcus fully. The look on his face was one Marcus would never forget. It wasn't just anger or disappointment. It was something deeper, more profound. It was the look of a man who had spent his entire career fighting against the exact kind of behavior Marcus had just displayed, only to have it directed at his own daughter. "Officer Bennett," Lieutenant Freeman said, his voice controlled but dangerous. "I've just been briefed on what happened here. Is it true that you drew your service weapon on my daughter during a routine traffic stop?" Marcus opened his mouth and closed it. What could he say? How could he possibly justify what he had done, especially now standing in front of this man? "Sir, Marcus stammered, then fell silent. There was no excuse, no explanation that would make this right. "That's what I thought," Lieutenant Freeman said coldly. He turned to Rodriguez. "Has IA been notified?" "Yes, sir. They're sending someone now. I've already placed Bennett on administrative leave." "Good." Lieutenant Freeman looked back at Marcus, and what happened next shocked everyone present. The lieutenant's expression shifted from fury to something else, something that looked almost like pain. His shoulders sagged slightly and he let out a long, weary sigh. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. "Do you know what the worst part of this is, Bennett? It's not that it happened. It's that I'm not even surprised. Do you understand how soul-crushing that is? To have reached a point where my first instinct when my daughter calls me crying, telling me an officer pulled a gun on her, is not shock but rather a grim acknowledgement that of course this happened. Of course it did." Marcus felt tears pricking at his own eyes, though he had no right to cry, no right to feel sorry for himself in this moment. Lieutenant Freeman continued, his voice growing stronger but no less pained. "I've been on this force for 32 years. 32 years of trying to be a bridge, trying to show communities of color that we're not all the enemy, that some of us are here to protect and serve everyone equally, and then something like this happens and all of that work, all of those years, feel meaningless." He took a step closer to Marcus, close enough that Marcus could see the pain in the older man's eyes. could sense the internal struggle between his duty as an officer and his rage as a father. Lieutenant Freeman stood inches from Marcus now, close enough that Marcus could see the slight tremor in the older man's jaw as he struggled to maintain his composure. The street had gone completely silent. Even the birds seemed to have stopped chirping, as if nature itself was holding its breath for this moment. "My daughter is a doctor," Lieutenant Freeman said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the stillness. "She spent today saving lives in the emergency room. She stitched up a gunshot victim, stabilized a child who came in after a car accident, and held the hand of an elderly man as he took his last breath because no family members could get there in time. That's what she does. That's who she is." Marcus's throat felt tight. He couldn't look away from the lieutenant's eyes, couldn't escape the weight of what he was hearing. "And you," Freeman continued, "you pulled a gun on her. You terrorized her on a public street for the crime of existing, while black and driving a nice car in what I assume you thought was the wrong neighborhood. Do you understand what that does? Not just to her, but to every black person who hears about this story. It tells them that it doesn't matter if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a college student, or a sanitation worker. Your education doesn't protect you. Your profession doesn't protect you. Even having a father who's a lieutenant in the police department doesn't protect you." Aisha had moved to stand beside her father, her hand resting on his arm, both supporting him and being supported by him. Her face was streaked with tears, but her expression was composed now, dignified despite everything she had been through. "Dad," she said softly. "Dad, it's okay. I'm okay." "No, baby, it's not okay," Freeman replied, his voice breaking slightly. "It's never okay, and I'm tired of telling my children that it's okay, that they just need to keep their hands visible and speak politely and maybe they'll survive an encounter with the police. I'm tired of having to worry every time you or your brother leave the house that you might not come home because some officer made assumptions based on the color of your skin." He turned back to Marcus, and tears were now visible in his eyes. "I've dedicated my life to this badge. I believed in the ideal of what police work should be. I've mentored dozens of young officers, taught them about community policing, about treating people with dignity and respect. I've spent countless hours in community meetings listening to concerns, trying to build trust. And then one of our own does something like this, and I have to look my daughter in the eye and try to explain why." Marcus felt his own tears spilling over. The full magnitude of what he had done was crushing him. This wasn't just about a bad traffic stop or a poor decision in the heat of the moment. It was about a pattern of thinking, a systemic problem that he had been part of without even fully realizing it. "Sir," Marcus began, his voice choked with emotion. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I don't have any excuse. I can't take back what I did, and I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm ashamed of myself." Lieutenant Freeman studied him for a long moment. "Are you ashamed of what you did, Bennett? Or are you ashamed that you got caught? Are you sorry for terrorizing my daughter? Or are you sorry that there were witnesses and cameras?" The question cut deep because Marcus didn't immediately know the answer. Was he truly remorseful? Or was he just desperate to save his career? The fact that he had to think about it told him everything he needed to know about himself. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I want to say I'm genuinely sorry for what I did to Dr. Freeman, and I think I am. But you're right to question it. I've been so defensive this entire time, so focused on justifying my actions instead of recognizing how wrong they were. I think I need to sit with that uncomfortable truth about myself." It wasn't the answer Lieutenant Freeman had expected. Most officers in Marcus's position would have immediately insisted on their genuine remorse, would have made excuses or tried to explain away their behavior. But there was something about Marcus's honest uncertainty, his willingness to admit that he didn't know his own heart, that gave Freeman pause. "You know what happens now, don't you?" Freeman asked. "Internal Affairs will investigate. They'll review every traffic stop you've ever made, every report you've filed looking for patterns. The media will cover this story. Your name will be associated with this incident for the rest of your life. Your career in law enforcement is likely over." Marcus nodded, accepting this reality. "I understand, sir, and I accept the consequences of my actions. But here's what I need you to understand," Freeman continued. "This isn't just about you losing your job. This is about my daughter having to live with this memory forever. Every time she gets pulled over in the future, she'll remember this moment. She'll remember the fear, the humiliation, the feeling of having a gun pointed at her face. That fear doesn't go away. That trauma stays with you. Aisha spoke up then, her voice steady despite the tears still visible on her cheeks. Officer Bennett, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. If I had been white, if I had been a white woman in a nice car reaching for my registration, would you have drawn your gun? The question hung in the air like a challenge, demanding honesty in a way that couldn't be deflected or avoided. Marcus thought about it, really thought about it. He pictured the same scenario but with a white woman in that car. Would his hand have moved to his weapon? Would he have shouted commands? Would he have felt that same spike of fear and suspicion? No, Marcus said finally, the admission painful but necessary. No, I don't think I would have. Aisha nodded slowly as if confirming something she already knew. Thank you for being honest. That's the first step, you know? Acknowledging it. Too many people in positions like yours spend their entire lives insisting they don't see color, that they treat everyone the same, when their actions tell a completely different story. My daughter is right, Lieutenant Freeman added, and that's why I've stayed in this job for as long as I have, despite everything. Because change has to come from within. We need officers who are willing to examine their own biases, who are willing to admit when they're wrong, who are willing to do the hard work of becoming better. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, carrying a note of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps an opening. Bennett, you made a terrible mistake today. You let your biases override your training and your common sense. You terrorized an innocent woman and damaged the trust between the police and the community. Those are facts that can't be changed. Marcus nodded, accepting every word. But, Freeman continued, I've also just watched you do something that very few officers in your position do. You admitted you were wrong. You acknowledged your bias instead of hiding behind excuses. You answered my daughter's question honestly, even knowing it would make you look worse. That tells me that maybe, just maybe, there's hope for you yet. Marcus looked up, confused and surprised. He had expected nothing but condemnation, had prepared himself for the righteous fury of a father whose daughter had been wronged. This unexpected acknowledgement felt unearned, undeserved. I don't understand, sir, Marcus said. I don't deserve any consideration after what I did. You're right, you don't, Freeman replied bluntly. But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about what the community needs. We need officers who can learn, who can grow, who can become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. The question is, are you willing to do that work? Marcus felt something shift inside him. This was a turning point, he realized. He could accept the consequences of his actions and slink away, bitter and defensive, learning nothing. Or he could use this as a moment of transformation, a chance to confront the ugly truths about himself and become better. I want to be, Marcus said. I want to do that work. I don't know if I can or if I'm strong enough to face everything I need to face about myself, but I want to try. Lieutenant Freeman nodded slowly and then did something that shocked everyone present. He extended his hand to Marcus, not in friendship exactly, but in acknowledgement of a difficult truth spoken and a commitment made. Marcus stared at the extended hand for a moment, hardly believing what he was seeing. This man whose daughter he had terrorized was offering him a handshake. It felt wrong somehow, too generous, too forgiving. But as he looked at Lieutenant Freeman's face, he understood. This wasn't forgiveness. This was an acknowledgement that the hard work was just beginning. With a trembling hand, Marcus reached out and shook Freeman's hand. The grip was firm, almost painfully so, and Freeman held it for a long moment, making sure Marcus understood the weight of what was being offered and what was being asked in return. This doesn't mean you're off the hook, Freeman said, his voice firm. You'll still face the investigation. You'll still answer for what you did. But if you're serious about doing the work to become better, I'm willing to be part of that process. After everything is done, after the dust settles, if you're still interested in law enforcement, maybe we can talk about what real community policing looks like. Marcus nodded, unable to find words adequate to express what he was feeling. Shame, gratitude, determination, and fear all swirled together inside him. Aisha stepped forward then, and Marcus instinctively stepped back, giving her space. She looked at him with an expression that was complex and hard to read. There was still anger there, still pain, but also something else. A kind of weary hope, perhaps, or a determination to see something positive come from something terrible. Officer Bennett, she said, her voice clear and strong, I'm going to be honest with you. Part of me wants to see you fired, prosecuted, made an example of. Part of me wants you to feel every bit of fear and humiliation that I felt today." Marcus nodded, accepting this. He deserved her anger. "But," she continued, "I'm also a doctor. I've taken an oath to do no harm, to heal when I can. And I think our whole system is sick. It's infected with racism and bias and fear. If you're willing to be part of the healing process, if you're genuinely committed to changing, then maybe something good can come from this horrible experience." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The crowd that had gathered was silent, hanging on every word. "I'm going to ask something difficult of you," Aisha said. "When you face your internal affairs investigation, when you're interviewed by the media, when you have the opportunity to tell your story, I want you to be completely honest. Don't minimize what you did. Don't make excuses. Tell the truth about your biases, about what you were thinking, about why you acted the way you did. Because that honesty, that vulnerability might help other officers recognize those same patterns in themselves." "I will," Marcus promised, and he meant it. "I'll tell the truth no matter how bad it makes me look. You have my word." Aisha studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'm choosing to believe you. Don't make me regret that choice." An internal affairs officer arrived then, along with additional patrol units. The scene was about to shift from a tense confrontation to an official investigation. Rodriguez approached Marcus with an apologetic expression. "Bennett, I need your badge and weapon. You know the drill." Marcus unclipped his badge and handed it over, feeling the weight of its absence immediately. Then he carefully removed his service weapon, checked that it was secure, and handed it to Rodriguez. With those simple actions, his identity as a police officer was suspended, possibly forever. Lieutenant Freeman pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yes, this is Lieutenant Freeman. I need to speak with the chief directly. It's about the incident involving my daughter." "Yes, I'll hold." While Freeman spoke to the chief, Aisha accepted hugs and words of support from several of the neighbors who had witnessed the incident. The elderly woman who had first called out gave her phone number to Aisha, insisting she call if she needed anything. The man with the dog offered to be a witness in any proceedings. The young couple invited her inside for water or anything else she might need. In the midst of this outpouring of support, Aisha felt some of the trauma beginning to lift, replaced by a sense of community and solidarity. These strangers had stood up for her, had recorded the incident, had refused to let it be swept under the rug. That meant something. Marcus watched these interactions from a distance, seeing the human impact of his actions in a way he never had before. These weren't just abstract concepts about community relations or bias in policing. This was real. These were real people with real emotions, real fear, and real anger at a system that had failed them too many times. The internal affairs officer, a stern woman named Captain Richardson, approached Marcus with a recording device. "Officer Bennett, I need to take your preliminary statement. You have the right to have union representation present." "I don't need a lawyer," Marcus said. "I'll tell you exactly what happened, and I won't hide behind legal protection. What I did was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Captain Richardson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by this response. In her 15 years handling internal affairs cases, she had never heard an officer accused of misconduct decline representation right away. Usually they lawyered up immediately and fought every step of the way. "Are you certain? This is a serious matter. Your statement will be on record and could be used in any subsequent proceedings." "I'm certain," Marcus replied. "I pulled my weapon on an unarmed woman who was complying with my orders. I let my biases and assumptions guide my actions instead of the situation itself. I escalated when I should have remained calm. Those are the facts, and I'm not going to waste everyone's time pretending otherwise." For the next hour, Marcus gave his statement, answering every question honestly and directly. He described his thought process, his assumptions, his fears, and his realizations. He admitted that if Dr. Freeman had been white, he likely would not have reacted the same way. He acknowledged that he had a pattern of viewing black drivers with more suspicion than white drivers, even if he had never consciously admitted it to himself before. Captain Richardson's expression remained professionally neutral, but internally she was stunned. This was potentially the most honest statement she had ever taken from an officer under investigation. It would make her job easier in some ways and more complicated in others. Usually, she had to build a case against officers who insisted they had done nothing wrong. But here was an officer essentially building the case against himself. When the statement was complete, Captain Richardson turned off her recorder and looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. "Officer Bennett, in all my years doing this job, I've never had someone be this forthcoming. I want you to know that while I appreciate your honesty, it's going to make things harder for you, not easier." "I understand," Marcus said, "but I'd rather face the consequences of telling the truth than live with the burden of covering it up." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Freeman had finished his conversation with the chief and was now speaking with Aisha, making sure she was truly okay and discussing what would happen next. The chief had already issued a statement to the press, acknowledging the incident and promising a thorough investigation. The body camera footage would be released to the public once Internal Affairs had completed their initial review. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the suburban street, the crowd slowly dispersed. The witnesses had all given their contact information and statements. The news crews that had arrived were packing up their equipment, having gotten their footage and interviews. The scene that had been so chaotic and emotionally charged just hours ago was beginning to return to normal. But nothing would truly be normal again. Not for any of the people involved. Aisha sat in her car, her father leaning in through the window, speaking softly to her. "Are you sure you're okay to drive home? I can have someone bring your car later." "I'm okay, Dad," Aisha replied, though her hand still shook slightly. "I need to do this. I need to drive home on my own terms, not let this incident take that independence from me." Freeman nodded, understanding the importance of this small act of reclaiming control. "Okay, but I'm following you home." "And I'm staying for dinner. Your mother is already cooking enough food for an army, and you know how she gets when she's worried." Aisha smiled despite everything, picturing her mother in the kitchen, channeling her fear and anger into making comfort food. "Okay, Dad, that sounds good." As Aisha drove away, her father's car following protectively behind, Marcus stood on the sidewalk next to his patrol car, which would soon be driven back to the station by another officer. Sergeant Rodriguez approached him, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Bennett, you did the right thing today. Not at first, obviously, but in how you handled everything after. That takes guts." "It doesn't change what I did," Marcus said quietly. "It doesn't undo the harm." "No, it doesn't," Rodriguez agreed. "But it's a start. Real change starts with honest acknowledgement of the problem. You've taken that first step. The question is whether you'll keep going." Marcus watched Aisha's car disappear around a corner, her father's vehicle following steadily behind. He thought about the fear he had seen in her eyes, the tears, the trembling hands. He thought about all the other people he had pulled over during his 20 years on the force, and wondered how many of them had gone home feeling that same fear, even if they had never complained or reported it. "I'll keep going," Marcus said, more to himself than to Rodriguez. "I have to. Because if I don't, then what happened today was meaningless suffering. At least if I change, if I learn, if I become better, then maybe Dr. Freeman's courage and how she handled this can inspire something positive." Rodriguez clapped him on the shoulder. "Good man. Now go home. You've got a lot of thinking to do, and it's going to be a long road ahead." As Marcus was driven back to the station in the passenger seat of Rodriguez's car, he pulled out his phone and began researching. He looked up books on implicit bias in law enforcement. He searched for training programs on cultural competency and community policing. He found articles written by Black officers about their experiences in the profession, about the unique challenges they faced. He had hours of mandatory paid leave ahead of him while the investigation proceeded. He intended to use every minute of that time to educate himself, to confront his biases, to understand the system he had been part of, and the harm it caused. It wouldn't be easy. It would be uncomfortable and sometimes painful. But it was necessary. 3 months later, after the investigation had concluded and Marcus had been officially terminated from the police force, Lieutenant Freeman kept his promise. He met Marcus at a coffee shop to talk about what came next. Marcus looked different. Thinner, more tired, but also somehow lighter. The defensive armor he had worn for so long had been stripped away, leaving someone more vulnerable but more real. "Thank you for meeting with me, sir," Marcus said as Freeman sat down across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I keep my promises," Freeman replied. "How have you been?" "Honestly, it's been the hardest 3 months of my life," Marcus admitted. "Losing my job, dealing with the media attention, having my mistakes broadcast for the world to see. But also the most important 3 months. I've learned more about myself, about the communities I claimed to serve, About the real impact of bias in policing than I learned in 20 years on the force. Freeman nodded, studying the man across from him. And what are you going to do with that knowledge? Marcus took a deep breath. I want to teach. I want to work with police academies, training new officers about implicit bias and proper community engagement. I want to share my story, as painful as it is, so that maybe some young officer won't make the same mistakes I did. I know I can never be a police officer again, but maybe I can help create better officers. Freeman considered this, then pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. This is the contact information for the director of the Police Academy's Community Relations Program. I've already spoken to her about you. She's willing to meet and discuss how your experience might fit into their curriculum. No promises, but it's a start. Marcus picked up the card, his eyes filling with tears. Sir, I don't know what to say. After everything I did to your daughter, you're helping me. I'm not doing this for you, Freeman said bluntly. I'm doing this because we need to break the cycle. Every officer who gets fired for misconduct and disappears into bitterness is a wasted opportunity for change. If you're genuine about wanting to be part of the solution, then I'm going to help make that happen, not because you deserve it, but because the next person who gets pulled over deserves better. How is Dr. Freeman? Marcus asked hesitantly. She's doing well, Freeman replied. She's in therapy to process the trauma, but she's strong. She's also been speaking at community events about her experience, advocating for police reform. In a way, you've both become teachers because of that day, just in different ways. Marcus nodded, accepting this. I'd like to apologize to her again in person if she's ever willing. No pressure, and I'd completely understand if she never wants to see me again. I'll ask her, Freeman said, but understand that whether or not she wants to meet with you, you need to move forward with your commitment to change. This isn't about earning her forgiveness. It's about becoming the person who would never have done what you did in the first place. I understand, Marcus said, and sir, thank you for seeing something in me worth salvaging, even when I'm not sure I would have extended the same grace if our positions were reversed. Freeman stood to leave, then paused. Bennett, you want to know why I'm doing this? It's because I still believe in redemption. I still believe people can change. The day I stop believing that is the day I need to turn in my own badge. But don't mistake this for weakness or softness. You've been given a second chance that most people don't get. Don't waste it. I won't, sir. I promise I won't. As Lieutenant Freeman walked out of the coffee shop, Marcus sat alone with the business card in his hand and a future full of hard work ahead of him. The road to redemption would be long and difficult, but for the first time in months he felt something like hope. Not for himself, but for the possibility that something good could come.